خير كيف الحال؟ بالإنجليزي أو بالعربي؟ بالعربي فصحى أو بالعامية؟ فصحى؟ لا بالإنجليزي فصحى أو إنجليزي أمريكي؟ Good morning everybody. Thank you for coming and thank you for staying. Thank you for putting up with my terrible Arabic. Are we ready to begin? Sure. Good. Well, thank you very much, first of all, to the conference organisers for their kind invitation. It's a great honour to be at this magnificent conference, the first time for me. I've been waiting for 19 years and finally I'm here. So thanks very much to the organisers. And thanks to the American University in Cairo, a really distinguished and famous institution. It's wonderful to be on this fantastic campus here, and wonderful to see so many of you as well here with me in this superb conference. Thank you. Is this okay without it? Okay. Can you hear me at the back? Yes, okay. So you won't sleep? You can hear me properly? Maybe you will sleep if you hear me properly, I don't know. We'll see how we go. Okay. Thank you also to the British Council who have generously sponsored me for this conference and whom I've worked with for many, many years. I'm most grateful to them, to Jonathan and the team, for their kind organisation and also for inviting me here along with the conference organisers. What I'm going to talk about today, as you can see on the screen, is creative assessment within creative education, creative language learning. And originally I said to the organisers they should put my talk later in the conference. My thought was, if you talk about assessment first of all, everybody will go home and it'll be a very quiet conference after that. But then after some discussion with the organisers, we thought actually it's not a bad thing to put it now at the beginning, because one problem with assessment is that it's often seen as the ugly sister, or not to be sexist about it, the ugly brother of language teaching. In other words, assessment is seen as something we don't really want to mix with very much. We prefer to leave it to somebody else and get on with the creative teaching ourselves. So it's not a bad idea now, right at the beginning of this conference, to grasp the nettle, as we say, to grasp the nettle. You know what a nettle is? A prickly plant which hurts your hand. To grasp the nettle and say, right, let's see how we can put assessment alongside and within the teaching and learning program, not leaving it outside as an extra, as an optional one. And that's why I'm trying to talk about today how we can be creative in our assessment within a creative model of teaching and learning. So the first word, of course, of the conference theme is creative, and the idea of community as well. And I want to see how we can work these together, linking up with assessment, and we'll see how we do that. And I want to put to you a particular model of how to do it, which I call the voices model. Dr. Dina mentioned earlier about different voices, different Englishes, and I want to think how the voices model, as I call it, VOICES, the voices model of assessment, can help us to bring creative assessment into our practice more thoroughly and more systematically, and therefore improve our teaching and learning at the same time. Now the voices model, voices is an acronym for a number of different elements. And as I'm talking about assessment, of course, at the end of my session there will be a short written test. Well, maybe not written anyway. But I couldn't talk about assessment without doing some assessment, could I? That would be cheating. So if you want to leave the hall, I'm sorry, you have to have 90% on the test. I'm sorry about that. But that's just to put this into practice, as we say. You think I'm joking? They think I'm joking. Okay, I'm joking. All right. So let me start by telling you a little bit about myself. And the reason for this is to give you some background to show you why I'm thinking about assessment in this way, but also some of the limitations in my thinking. So I'll start off with a photograph. This is a photograph of me, 1981. Is it difficult to guess which one is me? No? Are you having any trouble, anybody? Yeah, you guessed it. I'm this one here at the front. Where was I teaching? In Sudan, yes, I went to teach in Sudan. I wanted to escape the cold climate of England. So I saw an advertisement in the newspaper which said, "Teachers wanted in Sudan, no experience necessary." So I'm amazed that they took me, but I went to Sudan for 2 wonderful years, and I was teaching in a secondary school in the north of Sudan, in Argo, near Dongola, on the Nile River, and I had 2 wonderful years. And one of the best things was there was no other khawaja for miles around. So I had to learn Arabic, Daya Shinu, kind of Sudanese Arabic, but I had a wonderful time. These are some of my friends and colleagues who were there, and I love the photo. Look, it looks really, you've got the sellotape sticking it together. It looks really oldie world, and it strikes me that probably this was taken before most of you were actually born. Is that fair? Who here was not born in 1981? Yeah, okay, more than half. Jonathan, you can put your hand up. But yeah, so I've been teaching. I started in Sudan, and this is also quite important because I was teaching in very big rural classrooms. Some of my classes were 125 students. They couldn't fit in the room. They would sit on the windowsill and stick their head in through the window. It was that kind of class. But we had great fun. We had mud floors. We had holes in the walls for windows. The school was just built. But what made it a wonderful experience was the community, the people, the willingness, almost a desperation to learn English and to learn something different about the world. And we had a wonderful experience there. And that, in a sense, coloured my teaching ideas later on, as I got to learn how to teach later. I got more experience, and so on. Now I work at the University of Bedfordshire in the Centre for Research in English Language Learning and Assessment. We specialise a lot in assessment, but we also look at language learning in the wider sense. This is based in England. This is the south of England. This is London here. And my institution is here in Luton, just north of London. I'm sorry that the picture is a little bit grey and fuzzy. I think when they made it, it was probably raining, and so they couldn't see it very clearly. But nonetheless, this is the south of England. This is Bedfordshire. This is not my house, not yet. This is the Research Centre at the University of Bedfordshire. You can see the student swimming pool in the front here. Well, actually it's the fish pond, but it has no fish at the moment. But this is the Research Centre at the University of Bedfordshire, where I work. A bit more background. This is me in Sudan in my younger days with one of my students in the secondary school. I've taught a lot in the Arab world. After going to Sudan, I studied Arabic in Damascus, and then went to study in Iraq, where I was teaching for the British Council in Baghdad, and also studying Arabic at Constantia University in the morning. Again, probably before most of you were born. In the bad old days of Saddam Hussein, maybe you remember him. I've also worked in Asia, various places in Asia. My main research is in discourse assessment and computers in education. I've written a book here about discourse, and a more heavy book about reading. Can you see this one here? Can you read this yellow writing? What does it say? What does it say, anybody? Yeah, it says taxi, but it's actually upside down. Where would you see the word taxi written like that? Where?
London.
Well, the answer is on the road, surface of the road, where the taxi must park. Now, my publisher suggested this as the cover for my book. I'm not quite sure why they did, but it struck me as very suitable for 2 reasons. One, the book is all about discourse and how we understand reading by using our previous knowledge and the knowledge of the context. So if you know that this is from the road, you may work out the word taxi, even though it's upside down, from the context of your reading. But also I thought it was a very relevant cover because my main job actually is a taxi driver. I have 3 teenage children, and most of my life is driving them from one party to another. So I'm sorry, I can only work in education part-time besides that. But this is my first book on reading. My second book is about intertextuality, also in reading. This won the prize for the most boring book cover in history. Well, it would have won the prize if I'd entered it for that. But that gives you some idea of the kind of areas that I've been working in in recent years. Okay, if we go to the conference theme, we've got the word creative again, we've got the word community, and the word inspiring. Now it's very difficult to inspire people with assessment. Often the opposite happens. But nonetheless, I want to talk really about the idea of creative assessment, and particularly the sense of community. Because assessment, as I'll say today, should not be a lonely activity carried out by the teacher in isolation from other elements of the community. And I want to explain how that can be done. So I'll start addressing the theme, and I'll address it in the following way. I want to talk about creative assessment, emphasizing these areas: community, creativity, and ownership, and what I call classroom-based assessment, CBA, is the acronym I will use, classroom-based assessment, particularly how can we use CBA to greater effect in real classrooms. So we're talking about assessment in the classroom particularly. I'm not really talking about the final test that our students have to do at the end of their school lives. I'm talking more about the more integrated assessment in the classroom setting. And CBA is the acronym that I will use for that. Okay, well let's start with the point that all teachers do CBA. Did you know that? Yeah. All teachers do it. If you look at this example here, the teacher, by the way, is the one on the left. I believe, anyway. The teacher, look at this teacher. Is this teacher teaching or assessing? Well, we assume that this teacher has been teaching some element of mathematics or arithmetic, and she's now got the student to come up to the front to write an answer on the board. Is this part of her teaching or part of her assessment? Well, of course, it's both. She's been teaching, but she now wants to check whether this student, and of course other students too, whether they have understood what she's doing. This is not an extra thing that she's doing at the end of her class. It's integral to her whole lesson, because if this boy makes a mistake, she must learn something not only about him, but also about herself. And she must say, the boy didn't get it. It's not his fault. I won't say, stupid Welle, get back to your seat. I will say, okay, I've done something wrong. I need to rethink what I was doing to make sure that this boy gets it. So that's a very straightforward example of how all teachers do it, but some of them do it less consciously or less critically or with less awareness than others. But we start with a positive point. We all do it. The question then is, why do we sometimes do it badly, and how can we do it better? So, all teachers do it. What does it involve? Well, usually it involves noticing something. You notice that something is going wrong, or that something is going right. You may observe your class more formally. So this noticing is something that just happens. But you may actually be more systematic and actually observe something in your students to try and find out what is going right or wrong. So these are different areas in which assessment can take place. You might then actually check something more systematically around the class. Or you might more formally test them with a test at the end of the lesson, or the end of the week, or the end of the semester, whatever it may be. These are all parts of CBA. Some of them are more formal, some of them are more informal, but they are all very, very important. I remember when I did a project in Jordan, again for the British Council, working with the Ministry of Education in Jordan, and I went visiting schools around the whole country to see how they were doing in terms of their English language teaching and learning. One big problem that I noticed, which I think is common across the Arab world actually, is teachers were not checking systematically on the learning of their students. They would teach a point, they would say, repeat after me everybody, everybody would sing along happily, you know the thing, la 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 la, whatever. I went to the market, whatever. The teacher would say, good, very good, next point. Did they check learning? No. All they checked is that people could sing sweetly. But they didn't check people's understanding of any sort. So I said to people, one of my main reports was, no, you should stop and you should systematically check around the class. Not only the students who put their hands up, but actually students randomly around the class, so that every student knows that he or she could be picked on or asked a question at any time. Should I try the same here? Maybe should I ask somebody at the back, are you listening? Ask somebody over here, are you listening? Check if Jonathan's, you're not sleeping, Jonathan? No? Ask somebody over here. I won't do it now because I'm too generous, it's too early in the morning, but you get the point. The point is that checking is a crucial part, very often forgotten, certainly in Jordanian classes, but also around the world. And if teachers do not check that learning is taking place systematically, then learning will not be as effective as it could be. So that for me is one big lesson for teacher training, for example. Check that teachers are checking learning regularly, systematically, and around the whole class, not just the ones who say teacher, teacher, teacher. That's all too common, I think, is that we pick only those who put their hands up. We must not do that. So, these are elements of CBA, but, as I've already hinted, unfortunately, very often it's not done very well. Look at this quotation here from one of the few books actually on classroom-based assessment. All too often, classroom tests are given, the results reported to students, and instruction remains unchanged. Why should that be? Well, very often we give a test, we give the report to students saying good student, bad student, but we ourselves as teachers, we don't think of ourselves as good or bad, we think the burden is on them. But that's not true, of course. The instruction must be responsive to the assessment that we give. And this means a shift in our mindset as teachers, not to think that assessment is for students, no. Assessment is for us as well, for all of us in the community of the class and the community of the school, so that we can make sure that learning is going ahead as it should. So I think here's a fundamental misunderstanding that instruction should not change as a result of assessment. On the contrary, it must be constantly responsive to what we see through assessment, and assessment must also be constant. So, very often, the problem is CBA is not effective at the moment. My aim is to change this, so let's think why not in a bit more detail. Here is a teacher here, this is not me. I never wore a yellow skirt in my life. This is a teacher here, again, teaching some sort of simple mathematics. Very often, in classroom assessment, the teacher works alone. We see ourselves as the king or the queen, the melek or the emperor in our classroom. We say, this is my classroom, when I shut the door, this is my empire. Nobody can tell me what to do. I'm the king or queen here. Very often, assessment is not frequent, it's just occasional, maybe once a week. Not frequent. Maybe it's always the same kind of assessment. I remember when I was at primary school, every Friday morning we had a vocabulary test. It was always exactly the same format, only once a week, every Friday morning at the end of the week, the teacher would select 20 words, apparently at random, and ask us to spell them. Then we would mark each other's work. We would go home to our parents and we would say, oh, I got 17 out of 20 today. They would say, very good. The teacher knew nothing about the marks. The teacher didn't seem to care. Okay? One of the problems of this was occasional. It was always the same kind of thing. Never changed. It was not linked to the syllabus. We don't know where those 20 words came from that the teacher... Maybe she just thought they were difficult words she would test us on. We had no idea. For us as students, there was no link with the syllabus. We could see none. What happened to the results? Well, she didn't keep a record of them. So therefore, the whole experience was forgotten and it disappeared. It was washed away. So although I suppose it had some benefit in helping me with my spelling to some extent, it did not have the benefit it could have had if she had done things differently. Now, it was planned, to be fair. She said once a week we'll have this test. But on the whole, the choice of the words and the vocabulary did not seem to be systematic in any way. So these, for me, actually are 6 common issues with assessment in the classroom. And I think I want to try and tackle each one of these 6 issues, and we'll talk a little bit now about how we can do it. But let me summarise in a different way these same 6, but I'll put it slightly differently. So, very often, classroom-based assessment is lonely, the teacher's a bit alone, isolated, not linked to the syllabus, occasional, monotonous, always the same, forgotten, and random. Now, the test at the end of the session today is not that you remember these 6, you'll be pleased to know. But we'll come back to them in a minute, because what I want to do is to think about, if these are the problems, what are the possible solutions? Now, it seems to me that looking at education around the world in various places I have been, these are 6 of the problem areas that we have with classroom-based assessment. What this means then, of course, is we are failing. How are we failing? Well, and by the way, I'm happy to give you copies of these slides if you want copies of the slides later, so you don't need to write things down. We are failing to assess fully. We are failing to link teaching, learning and assessment together. We are failing to link assessment to our learning aims. Why? Because we're not being systematic enough in it. We are treating assessment as some extra to be left either to somebody else or to the end of the lesson. In other words, we are failing to close the circle of teaching, learning and assessment, which should be working all together in a continuous cycle. So if we're failing, in particular, who are we failing? We're failing our weaker students. Why? Imagine that you have a class of weak students and you don't test them for a whole semester. At the end of the semester you do your test and you say, why, you're really, really weak. It's too late. You've spent months and months with these students and only at the end you've identified the fact that they are weak. No. Weak students need early intervention in lesson 1, not in lesson 50. So you need to know immediately who your weaker students are and what you can do to help them. They also need more attention than other people. They don't need to be neglected and set aside. And they need special attention, particular to their needs. Let me give you another example from Jordan. When I went round Jordan looking at students reading in particular, it seemed to me that even after 3 years of English, all they could do was chant in repetition. Okay? So the teacher would start them off, 1 or 2 of the good students would read, the others would copy in repetition around the class. And the teacher was happy with that. They said, look, they can all read, look. Could they all read? No. Arabic students are really good at memorizing. Extremely good at picking up language, memorizing it and repeating it back. And that can be a very good asset in learning, actually. It can also be a big disadvantage. Because what the teachers were failing to do was checking that these kids could actually read. So what I did is I went around after the lesson, I said to some of the students randomly, I said, please can you just read me this from the book? And they looked at me. Some of them could, but I estimated that roughly 60% of students in Jordanian primary schools after 3 years could hardly read a word. And that was a shock to me and to the teachers and to the ministry. And one reason was because they've never really been assessed. Teachers are too happy to get the positive. Look, they can all sing it along together with me, but not checking to see if they can actually do it. Now, I haven't taught in Egyptian schools or Egyptian institutions. It's up to you to think to yourself, is he saying something that's true about my context in Egypt? I don't know. But think about situations that you've been in and think about whether sometimes we're too lenient on students and we just accept too positive things from them without really checking if they're actually learning. This is particularly damaging, of course, for weaker students amongst us. Why don't we just leave it to the end of the semester, have a formal test at the end? Let the government provide the test for us we can get on with teaching. What do you think of that? Well, no, because formal testing is expensive, it's limited, we miss a lot if we just wait for the end of semester test. It can be too late to help our learners. It also gives teachers the wrong message. Too often teachers think, oh, assessment, that's really not my business, I'm a teacher. I'm not an examiner or an assessor. I remember when I did my teacher training course, assessment was a small module towards the end. It wasn't integrated right the way through. I thought to myself as a teacher, oh, there's a bit of assessment, it's a bit complicated. There are a few statistics, oh, I hate that, I'll leave that to somebody else. Well, that's completely the wrong attitude. In a teacher training syllabus and for teachers as a whole, we must embrace assessment as the most important tool for checking that we're doing the right thing. Otherwise, we are failing from day one. So it's not enough just to say, leave it to formal testing. We must use classroom-based assessment all the time, constantly. So the only way, in other words, is to get classroom-based assessment working properly at a classroom level, at a school level, and also at a national level. I was involved recently in a big project in Malaysia where the government in Malaysia has determined to include classroom-based assessment right the way through the school system. They put in a lot of money to train institutions, to develop teachers, to help teachers to integrate classroom-based assessment. They've understood in Malaysia that leaving it for the final exams is not enough. That's the road to failure. It's essential that teachers get a grip of it and do it well. So the Malaysian government, congratulations to them, are really aiming hard to get classroom-based assessment into their system. So, just to summarise where we are at the moment, CBA does happen at the moment, but it's not effective, especially problematic for weaker students. Okay. How can we make things better? Let's think now about the solutions if we can find some. Remember what I said a few minutes ago, that CBA, classroom-based assessment now, is always the same. It's occasional, it's isolated, it's lonely, it's often forgotten, and it's random. We have all of these examples. The Friday test once a week. I test what I want, I can do it myself, other teachers don't need to be involved. I'm so busy I can't be bothered to write the marks down. I just test students when I'm ready. I don't have a systematic way of doing it. These are all problems and mistakes. What can we do about it? Well, let me offer for you an alternative which I call the Voices model. Voices model. Instead of testing being always the same, it should be varied. Instead of occasional, it should be ongoing. Instead of isolated, the teacher working on her own in the classroom, it should be integrated with other activities in the school, particularly with the syllabus, integrated with the learning aims. Instead of being isolated, it should be collaborative. It should not be one teacher doing it. It should be something that's a group of teachers, that's a department, that's a school, and even the community and the national level as well. It should be linked up in some way. It should not just be left to wash away and be forgotten. It should be evidenced. In other words, we need to keep records of the assessment to make sure that we are consistently following through what we should be doing. And finally, to cover all of it, it should be systematic. So in other words, the Voices model, I hope it helps us to remember the 6 key things we should be doing with creative assessment. And now for the rest of my talk, I want to go through each one systematically. And then at the end of it, I will test you and ask you what voices means, okay? Wafaki, happy? Will you get 100%? We'll see. Okay, I'm sure you will. What's number 1 then? Luckily, it's there on the board. Okay, so here, variety. Tools for CB assessment. Now I want to think, what kind of tools can we use for classroom-based assessment? And I want to show you briefly a short video clip. I apologise that this is in American English, I'm sorry about that. Well, I'm trying to teach the world British English, but I haven't succeeded so far. But I'll show you the video here. and I'd like you to listen. What I like about this video is a group of very enthusiastic, young, dynamic teachers talking about assessment. And what they do is they talk about various tools they use. For example, tests, but other tools as well. Okay? And I want to watch just a bit of this video, not all of it, but just a bit of it. I'd like you to try and follow it and listen and pick out all of the tools they mention. There are only 120, okay? If you get 119, that's okay. Not 120, don't worry. But what I'd like you to do is listen and just note all the tools they mention. Okay? Ready?
We will be presenting our philosophical view and the best practices of diagnostic, formative, and summative assessments.
Now, just one thing. They don't only say them, they also sometimes show them on the screen without mentioning them. Okay? So sometimes you need to watch and take a note besides what they say. Okay? And they speak quite quickly.
Diagnostic assessment is important to determine what your students know at the beginning of the year and beginning of a new unit. This allows you to design the unit to meet the student's needs. These pictures are examples of some of the best practices for gathering this information. Using portfolios gives us a comprehensive view of past student achievements. It also shows us different strengths and weaknesses each student may have.
What tools have you seen or heard so far? Portfolios, of course. What else? Did you see the computer, of course, as one tool? Did you see the little cards? Little cards that you can keep records on and so on. And very often they don't mention it, but they show it. So let's look for a few more.
It gives us a more in-depth look than report cards, but report cards are still important. With portfolios, you can judge student work yourself. Attendance and health records are important also in determining what students' abilities are and priorities outside of school that each student may have.
What did you see? Report cards, attendance records, health records even. And you think, huh? Health records? What's that got to do with assessment? But the whole point is, you're trying to look at the student as a whole to see what's going right or wrong. It could be a matter of health or attendance. Not simply that the student is clever or stupid. So we've got to think a bit more widely. So they're saying these tools here, all of them, could be part of what we need in order to see what is going on, besides things like portfolios, of course.
Teacher-student interactions are important for teachers to get to know their students and their capabilities, not only in the classroom, but students' social skills as well.
A KWL chart is another good way to gauge what students know. This can take many forms, including written and game.
Do you know these charts? KWL? By happy coincidence, the K represents no, the W represents want, and the L represents learn. So it's just a simple scheme for checking on students' learning. Very, very simple.
Format, where it is also beneficial to see students' social skills. Accommodations need to be considered for students. This may be offering different ways to take the assessment, including computer and orally. Each student has different abilities and needs, so we need to make sure the form we offer the assessment in doesn't give us an inaccurate view of students' capabilities. A pretest tells you what students know about a specific topic.
So this is a pre-test, obviously a slightly more formal thing. You say, right, before we start the class, let's have a quick test to check what you know. Not to make you suffer and cry and feel ignorant and stupid, but just to check so that I, as the teacher, can see where we need to go next.
Pretest can help you see what is known about a topic, and you can use them to judge where you will begin your unit and what information needs to be covered based on standards and benchmarks. This information allows you to set goals for the unit and year. Not only as a teacher, but students can also benefit from the goal-setting process.
Now here, if you look at this, you see it's emphasizing the kind of formal booklet with a pre-test, but I would emphasize the informal. A pre-test may be 3 or 4 quick questions around the class. It doesn't need to be formalized, but it does need to be there. It could just be checking in initially around the class to see who knows what you're going to teach. If they all know it already, what's the use of teaching it? Yeah, if they don't know it, but they really lack the fundamentals, you may need to teach something different. So a pre-test can be very formal or very informal, depending on your needs and time.
This sets them up for success.
Now this, of course, is formative here.
Formative assessment is one of the most important classroom tools. It provides equal access to educational opportunities for all students, and it allows your students to develop critical thinking skills. Formative assessment also helps promote self-governing skills, and it aids all students into making progress. One major focus of formative assessment is giving feedback on students' growth toward a specific goal. Therefore, formative assessment is assessment for learning. These pictures include a collection of different types of formative assessment. Observing students during a task will allow you to check for student understanding on the subject. It's important for you to check for understanding by asking students informal questions.
So we've got high-tech things here, like this clicker. Do you know these clickers? Where everyone around the class has a clicker. That's a high-tech formal way of doing it, but equally valuable is a more informal way of checking. And they mentioned here observation. Absolutely crucial that we're constantly watching what is going on in our class. And we're constantly watching lots of students. Even if you have big classes, as I did in Sudan, of 120, you need to try your best to be aware of what's going on around your class. A really important skill for teachers is observation. Okay, I want to go back to the talk now. We talked a bit about variety and discussed different CBA tools. In the voices model, what does O stand for? Did you look at your notes? Okay, no problem. If you have notes, that's okay. So here, ongoing. In other words, assessment, classroom-based assessment should not just be one-off or once a week. It should be a constant process. Now, it could be something quite formal like portfolios or mark sheets, which carry the marks through the year. And portfolios you collect, for example, examples of writing, say, or examples of things students have read. It could be mark sheets, but for me it should be almost every few minutes you're doing some sort of check on learning. Also, institutional mechanisms. This should not just be something that a teacher does alone. The head of department and the head of the school should also help the teacher to organise ongoing assessment procedures. Look at this chart here. It's rather small, but I hope you can see what it's all about. This was done by a teacher in Malaysia, and she prepared this. She's got here, the names of the pupils are down here. You write the names in here. Here, listening and speaking evidence. These numbers here refer to the syllabus. So in the Malaysian syllabus, there's one element of evidence about listening and speaking which she must collect through her teaching. And here she will write a mark for the students. And here another mark for the students. And she does this every lesson through the year. And it's very, very systematic. Now, this was a particular individual teacher, but I showed this example to the ministry in Malaysia, and we suggested we should integrate this kind of thing into the thinking of all the schools. Because this kind of systematic approach enables a teacher to keep an ongoing record of what students are doing. This is mapped against the syllabus specification, so she knows that number 3 or number 4 of listening or speaking is a particular thing in the syllabus book. Okay? Now you might look at that and think, oh no, what a headache, what a nightmare. Okay? But if it's done systematically and in an ongoing way, it becomes much more simple. And you don't, of course, fill in every box for every lesson. No. One lesson you may only observe 3 or 4 students, so you fill in some numbers for them. The next lesson you observe different students. And gradually you fill out a record of what is happening in your classes, which helps you at the end of the semester to give a really clear account of what your students have been doing. So this chart here, this diagram, I think, is one way in which you can be systematic in your, and ongoing, we were talking about ongoing, in your evidence, but also integrated. You'll see that the teacher in that chart was integrating her teaching and learning with the syllabus and with the assessment of each element of the syllabus. So here, I want to show you now some samples of how we can integrate classroom-based assessment with the syllabus, with teaching and learning. Here is an example from Taiwan, where I also did a workshop on assessment. This is a booklet produced by the city of Taipei. They give it to all of their students, and it's a listening and speaking assessment handbook. But it's for the students, not for the teacher. This is integrating, this is building community and linking assessment, helping everybody to get involved. What do they do? Well, you write here your school, your class, your name, and then in the book here, these are the vocabulary items which you are supposed to learn. This column here is when you can understand them. This column here is when you can use them yourself. So you simply check, can I understand that word? Yes. Can I use it? Yes. And you build up, as a student, you build up a record of your own vocabulary through the year. Of course, the teacher can look at it as well, and your parents can look at it. But it's a good way of integrating the assessment with the learners and the parents and the community as a whole. It's not simply teacher-focused. There's another page. I'm sorry it's a little bit faint, but you've got here sentences, phrases. Sorry, I'm late. Do you understand it?